All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. Episode 22 of the Branching Factor podcast. Let me start, first of all, by introducing myself. I'm Tommy Thompson. I am the host of this here podcast, but we also need to start with a little bit of an introduction and an apology, in the sense that I forgot to tell you that the podcast was going to have a little bit of a hiatus after episode 21, where, as you might recall, back in episode 21, we did the Goal State Q&A, which was all about the series of courses that I'm looking to launch over on Kickstarter later this year. And yeah, I actually was going to take a little bit of a break from doing episodes of the podcast, critically because I was going to be on the road for a couple of months right afterwards. And yeah, so first of all, sorry about that. If you're thinking, hey, hang on, is this podcast dead? No, it is most certainly not. We actually have a stack of episodes coming your way, but critically, I didn't want to have the challenge or the burden, as it were, of trying to edit it all together while I was on the road. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. So since I saw you all last, I was over at the AI in Games Summer School in Malta back in June. And then right after that, I also attended a research seminar on computational creativity for game development at the Schloss Dagstuhl Institute in Germany. And then after that, I was over at Develop, which is the kind of game developers conference. Is the big game developer conference here in the UK. That was over in Brighton. I was there in July. And then I also took a little bit of a vacation as well. And shout out to my friends who I got to catch up with, and also particularly to Graham and Mel, who successfully got married. And yeah, so it was a great period. I was very tired, so I'm kind of grateful now to be back at my desk and getting on with work and doing all the things that I'm doing. But we're going to be posting updates to some of those events in the coming weeks here on Branching Factor, as well as just across the AI in Games Plus YouTube channel. In fact, for the summer school that ran in Malta, I've already put a vlog out that is available to watch over on AI in Games Plus, which gives you a little bit more of an idea of what that event is about. If you're a fan of the YouTube channel, you may recall, and also a long-time fan of the podcast, you may recall that we talked a lot about this previous entry of this summer school, which actually ran in Cambridge here in the UK. And I did a vlog of it, but also I hosted a panel at last year's summer school that we turned into an episode of the podcast. Now, I'm hoping I gave a talk this year, and I also moderated a panel, and fingers crossed, I'm just checking in with the organisers whether we have the recording of that panel and it's in a good enough condition that we can then share it here as a podcast episode. So I'll keep you up to date on that. In the meantime, the trip to Dagstuhl, that also has a vlog coming soon to AI in Games Plus, but we'll also have an extra episode of Branching Factor, because on the closing day of the event, I sat down and interviewed numerous people who were in attendance at the seminar. And really what I wanted to do was to help you get a vibe or a feeling of what does it mean to go to one of these events, and why are they so special? And particularly for someone like myself who's attended several of them, they are some of the highlights of my career. It's a research seminar that takes place in a very secluded part of Germany, where you just hang out for a week and ideate and come up with new ideas on how we could change the future of the applications of AI within games. And it was really fun. I had a great time, and I really want to kind of share some of that with you in the coming weeks. But in the meantime, we also have a stack of episodes coming up and already actually ready to go, pretty much. I just need to schedule them all in at the appropriate time. So next week, we have Christoph Salga and Victor Hervé, who are two of the organisers of the Generative Design in Minecraft competition. They will be joining me on the podcast to talk about the results of the 2024 entry of the competition. In fact, if you're a long-time fan of my work on AI in Games on YouTube, you will know that I did a video discussing this competition in its earlier days, and some of the stuff that they're coming up with now is absolutely wild. So it was really great to kind of reconnect with these guys, talk a little bit about where this is all going and like what the future of that competition is going to be. And then after that, we're going to, in early September, we're going to have a few of the developers from a Canadian indie studio, Transitional Forms, come to tell me a little bit about their game Little Learning Machines, which is a game all about teaching AI how to solve puzzles, but also it's a game that teaches you how the underlying AI technology works. We're also going to have a video on that over on AI in Games in a few weeks' time. So a kind of cross-transmedia thing that we're doing there. And I'm really excited to share that all with you. But Right now, the big talking point is I made a conference, or we made a conference. This wasn't an individual endeavor. So yeah, that's right. The AI in Games Conference 2024, which is going to be running in London at Goldsmiths University on Friday, November 8th. At the time of recording, we announced it this week, and the response thus far it's went down really well. I'm really, really excited. We have a stack of talks already announced. We've got more talks coming up. People can submit talks, and early bird tickets are on sale. If you're interested already, head on over to aiingamesconference.com for more information. But I really wanted to talk a little bit about how we got here. Because you think, hang on a minute, what? He was doing a Kickstarter thing for a bunch of courses, and now he's also running a conference. Goal State is very much my own baby, and it's something I'm working on my own, whereas the AI and Games Conference is something that has really came together from a number of people who were very enthusiastic about putting together an event in Europe that will service the game AI community. And so just to kind of set the scene and actually help paint a picture of what it's taken for us to get to where we are today, and also give some context as to why I wanted to run this and why I was happy to be a part of this, the organizational team that's putting this together. We thought we'd run this quick chat here on the podcast. So George and I have sat down, because George is also involved, George Osborne's also involved. So we're going to have a little chat on how it all came together. And hopefully in future, we're going to have more of the organizational team here on the podcast to talk a little bit about what we're doing, how we're putting it together, and really kind of dig into like the ethos and the philosophy behind it. All right, enjoy. And we're here. Yes, we did it. We made a conference. A little bit of a change, I think, since the last time we caught you all here on Branching Factor. You know, of course, I'm here, and I've managed to rope in George, resident podcast co-host. How you doing, sir?
I'm all right, thank you very much.
Now, I think critically, like, it's funny because one, we have you on Branching Factor on a semi-regular basis. You know, we kind of catch up with each other and what have you. But with regards to the conference, you're also involved in it. As I don't actually know what your official title is at this point. I think of you as just sort of the man who gets stuff done or tells me what to do that I'm not doing.
I described it, I think, to someone else as the Gubbins person. It's that sense of, okay, well, you know, there was someone who I spoke to, I came up with a much nicer nautical analogy of saying, you had the idea for the ship, but I helped construct the vessel itself to get it out to sea. But in you know, just thinking about it practically, it's the commercial stuff, it's the marketing stuff, it's the putting all together all the boring spreadsheets that underpin all of the conferences in the world. But until you've organised one, you've not seen one. So I've just been able to bring you the delights of my master spreadsheet template, which is
the spreadsheet game's pretty good, man.
Oh, thank you.
You have a good spreadsheet game, we will say. I think critically as well, like so. Well, first of all, let's get into it a little bit more. So yes, the AI in Games Conference, we announced it. In fact, at the time of our recording, we literally announced it yesterday. And so essentially 2 tracks we're going to be running: AI for gameplay and AI for production. It's going to be hosted at November 8th at Goldsmiths University of London. And we've got a cracking set. We've got a cracking organizational team. We'll talk a little bit about them in a second. We've also got a cracking bunch of initial speakers and talks lined up as well that are available on the website. You can go and have a look at that now at aiingamesconference.com. And we've also been very blessed with a bunch of partners who are sponsoring us and helping us get this event off the ground. So shout out to AWS for Games, to Creative Assembly and Riot Games, and also a little shout out as well to Bitpart AI, who have came on board as our lanyard sponsor. So yeah, it's been one of these things that we have been aggressively pursuing for. This was an idea, I guess, like we could talk a little bit about the origins of it, but it's happened very quickly. And I think, Mike, one of the big concerns, I think, for us all yesterday was we wanted to put this out in the world because we only have about 3 months now until it's going to run. And what was the reception going to be? And I think so far, actually, I would say about 99% of the response has been very, very positive. And I'm really, really happy about that. Certainly when we put it out across LinkedIn, Twitter, X, whatever. Actually, it's on pretty much every social media platform I can think of at this point, except Instagram. I didn't post it on Instagram, but it's on Threads. So shout out to the 4 people who follow me on Threads. But yeah, overall, it's actually been really well received, and we kind of, I think critically, one of the things we'll probably get into in the next 30 minutes or so is trying to build a brand and build a mission statement around what we were trying to do that I think we have landed critically, so that when people saw it, their first instinct was, this looks cool, we want to be there.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, let's go into it. I mean, where do you want to start with this? I mean, even just the provenance. I mean, because I feel like I actually think in terms of you talking to me about it first, we did a branching factor at GDC, right?
Yes,
where
we did.
You talked to me about what was going on at the conference, what my sense of was it. And then I just have this distinct feeling that it was either just before or just after you said, oh, by the way, we've been talking about this idea of a AI and games conference of some form in London at some point. Are you interested in hearing more? And at the time I was like, hey, look, ideas, what are they? Very cheap. Absolutely the cheapest thing around. Of course. You come back to me with this idea? Yeah, why not? And yet you did come back with more of an idea, but I didn't really sort of get I didn't get the provenance moment where I heard you talking with someone about it. You just came to me afterwards saying I chatted to some people. So I guess that might be an interesting place to start, right?
Yeah, so let's unpack that a little bit, because yes, I would argue that GDC was a catalyst for it this year. And go back and listen to that episode that we did about 6 months ago, where it was just us kind of reflecting on our week. George looked far more refreshed than I did, as I recall. I was looking very worn down in that particular episode, but which is okay for an audio medium for the most part. This conversation's been bouncing around for years, so let's give a little bit of background context. So what we've announced, the AI and Games Conference, is going to be the first event of its kind in Europe since 2017. So we do not have a dedicated event for people who work in the video games industry or people who are researchers who engage with the video games industry to have like an event where the audience is predominantly people who work in AI for games. We have other events that do exist, mostly in academic spaces. Shout out actually to IEEE's Conference on Games, which just ran literally last week in Milan. That is an IEEE, so the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers. That is an academic research conference. It has a really good track record. I've been involved in it. I've published work at it over the years. But it is first and foremost aimed at an academic audience. And there is an increasing interest and alignment with industry. But quite often, the conversations you're having at an industry event versus an academic event, they're not necessarily the same thing. There's a Venn diagram there. There's a bit of overlap, but they are still very much disparate things. So we used to have a bunch of these events, and going back to shout out to Alex Champagnard and his work with AIGameDev.com, we used to have the Game AI conference, which ran originally in Paris, and then he moved it to Vienna. Then we had in 2015 and 2016, we had Nuclei, which was sort of AI for the creative industries. And, you know, one of the things to really catch here is we're talking like a decade ago when the conversation around AI was very different, and also the amount of adoption of AI within the games industry wasn't as significant as it is now. A lot of the stuff that we talk about now in AI for game production was only really actually beginning to happen. In fact, when we talk about things like animation blending using AI, so motion matching as we call it, that was one of the first presentations I ever saw of it happened at one of those conferences. And it's like, here's a new idea. What if we train an AI that figures out animation blends? And now it's an Unreal Engine 5. So that the kind of state of the industry's changed quite a lot since then. But these were always difficult events to run. They were financially difficult to put together and also very exhausting for the people that did it. It was very much a community effort and people, dedicated individuals who were putting a lot of time and effort into it. So the Game AI conference and then Nuclei, that was critically Alex Champagnard and his wife Petra, as well as a whole group of other people that he roped in. In fact, I was one of them. I was a track chair. I volunteered to run a track for him at Nuclei for 2 years because, you know me, I like doing extra work for no money. And then we had Game AI North, which ran in Copenhagen for 1 year. And that was Emil Johansson, Phil Dunstan, and Richard Kogelnig. And again, a really great event. They struggled to just get it over the line. And so subsequently, they didn't do it the following year. Because Alex decided after Nuclear 2016, this is exhausting. I don't want to do this. And then similarly, after 2017, I think the guys just struggled to get that momentum going again to go into 2018. So we've had this problem for a while now. And in the last couple of years, I've had more and more people turn to me and say, you should run an event. And I'm like, like that I don't like, look, we need an event. I don't disagree with that. Nature abhors a vacuum. We need to find a way to fill it. And there's definitely a need for this in the industry, but we don't know who should be that person to put that together. And some people had turned to me and I said, look, I'm just one babbling idiot on the internet. I put together YouTube videos. That's a very different thing from curating an event. And so this conversation's been going on for a little while now. And then, so two members of the organizational team, critically, Alan Zacconi and Dugu Chakmak, we were having separate conversations between us. So Dugu raised it with me, I think last year, when we were both at the AI Summit at GDC. Full disclosure, of course, Dugu and I are both members of the advisory board for the AI Summit at GDC. And what we're trying to do is try to come up with something that's evocative of the AI Summit and the ML Summit, but it runs in Europe because GDC has no presence in Europe. It's very much an American conference series that runs out there. So we'd been talking about it and it's like, well, yeah, but again, I'm a bumbling idiot on the internet and you're a very capable R&D tech leader at a AAA game studio and neither of us are event planners. And then Alan Zacconi and I had a conversation about this and he's over at Goldsmiths, University of London. And he's like, it'd be great if we did something. I'm like, yeah, but I don't know what. Could we even just like get a couple of people to come in and give a talk or whatever? Yeah. And so fast forward to GDC this year. And this conversation came up again. First, Dugu and I had this conversation anyway, but we had other people coming up and saying, man, we really need something. Like, it's ridiculous that, you know, as great as the AI Summit is, and I'm really proud of that work, and it's important that we keep these things, like, you know, the AI Summit is going to continue to do its thing. My job isn't to step on that thing's toes, and I'm not going to sabotage that. My thing is I want that event to be as good as possible, and then critically for us to also run a great event, probably smaller and with a much smaller production budget. But we had several people come up to me and say, this is ridiculous. How is it that we have to fly all the way across the planet to have a gathering when it was like a bunch of different game developers who are all based in Europe? And in fact, Matthias Siemensmeyer, who's also part of the organizational team, literally just came up to me and he's like, we need to do something about this. I remember this quite clearly. It's just, something must be done. I'm like, okay. And so, yeah, I told you about this, and then I ended up having further conversations with Dugu after we recorded the podcast, where it's like, maybe we start testing the waters and what appetite there would be both for something like this to actually be done, but also who would be interested in helping us put it together. And so really that evening at the AI dinner that runs at GDC, myself, Dugu, Matthias, and Gabriel Robert all were like, we're going to make this happen. And then I came back and then I said, Alan, hey, GDC was great. I need to fill you in, because we'd literally said, let's have a conversation again about trying to put something admittedly much smaller than what we're doing now. We were having this conversation in early March. I said, okay, this is how this has escalated in the like week or so since I saw you. And then we had a meeting or two trying to figure out what we wanted to do and where we wanted to go. And at that point, as you phrased in your video game industry memo issue that published this morning, I need to speak to George Osborne, because I was like, look, I'm confident now with the team that we have, we can potentially get a venue if we can get Goldsmiths on board, which we did. And also I was confident that we could figure out the editorial, that we could get the talks in. It's like, okay. The rest of it, I don't know. And funnily enough, this was all happening right around the time you'd already asked me to come and give a talk at the London Developer Conference. And also you had ran, oh goodness, what was the name of that event a few years ago?
So I'd run a conference called Games Forum, but I'd also...
Games Forum, which I also spoke at, as I recall correctly.
Absolutely. I also produced the content for a number of Pocket Gamer Connects, and have done, like private events, private conferences. And because this is the thing about like when you came to me, it's really interesting organising conferences. So there's someone in the games industry, a gentleman called Jefferson Valadares, who works out in Portugal now, but he used to work at places like EA in mobile. He's gone more into like the VC space. And when he got into the industry, his first route was through events. And he said, the only thing that feels a bit like game development is organising conferences. You have a hard deadline, loads and loads of stuff to do. There are more tasks than you realise. At some point, you have to accept that done is better than perfect and get everything over the line. But the big challenge that almost every single event in the games industry often faces is the classic thing of all events, which is credibility. And for the most part, the big problem that events have is that actually they're organised by professional events businesses. And so, GDC is brilliant, but it's formed and run by Informa, a massive events conglomeration. There are then lots of other events companies who go, I know, video games are great, why don't we put on a conference? But actually having the knowledge, having the expertise, having a really clear sense of who your audience is, and most conferences actually don't start there. They often kind of stagger their way there because someone drags it over there and all of those things. But what those events do have is a lot of incredibly boring structure, a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of templates, a lot of models about how many bums you need on seats, how much sponsorship you need to sell, this, that, and the other. And so, for me, when you approached me about it and it started to become quite serious, it was that sense of being like, well, actually, you've got all of the stuff that's really hard for people to get. And I think most importantly of all, it just felt like the right time. Because when you spoke at LDC, and pretty much the main feedback I got from LDC was that everyone thought your session was one of the best, if not the best there. Because even though it was a predominantly business audience in the end, rather than just a developer audience, everyone said the same thing. We understand the importance of AI to video games historically. We understand the importance of AI within video games today. No one is explaining it in a clear way, which cuts away at the hype and actually gets you to what you need to know.
Yeah.
And with some wider developments as well in the games industry and the industry event space, there's a specialist games industry law summit now, which runs pretty regularly. So that runs, I think it's usually twice a year, but once somewhere hot, one somewhere cold. I can't really understand the logic or rationale behind the particular things, but all of the industry lawyers pop out there. And similarly, there are now things dedicated to external development. There are things dedicated to games finance. There are things dedicated to user acquisition. So for there not to be a European video games AI event, it just felt to me like not only is that a bit weird, exactly as you say, but actually the time is right now. So yeah, it was a bit of a no-brainer for me to get involved.
And I think it was also like sort of to speak a little bit more of my own personal career trajectory, I guess. Like certainly, things like the talk I did at LDC are evocative of where I am right now, that because I work for myself, but I work as a consultant to a lot of game studios, I'm often this external commentator on the state of the industry, and I've become increasingly more vocal about it in a way that historically I would not have done. And I remember critically when I started doing that, for example, when I started writing the newsletter this year, it was like, we need something like this because no one's doing it, or the people that are writing about it are either hype merchants or people that are very talented in their own right, but are not sufficiently educated or informed on the state of the sector to be able to really give a more useful, broader kind of analysis of this for, like you say, for a lot of people in the industry who are interested, but maybe don't know where to start with it. And so, yeah, like I remember, so this conversation about the event has came up several times, and I've raised it a couple of times with my partner, who gave me that look. The look which is, oh God, that is not another project of yours, is it? That's going to soak up a huge amount of your time and energy that's not really going to go anywhere, or is not going to maximize utility in some particular way. But I was like, oh God, I'm going to have this conversation when I get back from GDC, because on the flight back, I was like, yeah, this needs to happen. We need to have this. And if I'm going to be the idiot that's going to stick his head above the parapet and go, yo, we're going to make this a thing, then so be it. But I think one of the interesting parts of it, just as you were coming on board, actually, was also that, like you said, we had an idea of the identity because we knew what we wanted from an editorial level, but also about, like I said, the history of this, that we've had all these events that were successful and then simply disappeared. We wanted to try and come up with a way to maintain that so that this isn't a one and done. Like, ideally, we should finish this. This is all going to go great. We're going to have amazing talks. Everyone's going to really enjoy it, get a lot of value out of it. And then, like, the following, we're like, maybe we'll take a week off. And then, like, the week after that, we're like, so 2025, let's go. And so that led to this conversation of, well, how do we, it was a number of things. It was, how do we brand it? Like you said about getting confidence of the audience and being able to set out a mission statement, as it were, to that audience. But then also ensuring that we all are in alignment on where it's going as well. Like, these were all things that we were figuring out sort of in June, like late May into June, and then July into August has then just been like, okay, we're aligned on this. We need to start putting this together. Which, yeah, and actually, funnily enough, like, one of the things that we asked you about, because we were having this conversation internally when we brought you in, was, do we brand it the AI and Games Conference? Because that was something that I can, on one hand, I think from some perspectives that might seem like a no-brainer, but also there is a risk attached to it. Namely, well, me, I guess.
Yeah, it was an interesting conversation, and it's a really challenging one, because what you identified in terms of why a lot of the conferences that previously were organised no longer are here is because they fell too heavily on someone's head.
Yeah.
And so you have this almost like the weighing of the scales in terms of the branding of it, where you go, on the one hand, you have the audience, you have the reach, you have the recognition, the credibility, and frankly, through your consultancy work as well. And I think this was a sort of a really important point, is people understood that AI in Games is not just a fun YouTube channel. I mean, it's a great YouTube channel, obviously, but it's now more kind of a platform, a business, a formally created structure upon which you take on a huge amount of work, but it is recognisably its own distinct thing. I think the balancing act that you managed to bring to it, which was really clever and I think was important, was about actually organising it through a community interest company, which is essentially a not-for-profit vehicle in the UK. And so what that meant was, yes, you are, in terms of your brand, the face of it. You deliver a lot of credibility. You make sure that the quality bar is high. You make sure that sponsors feel confident knowing that this conference is actually going to be reaching lots and lots of different people, which is really key for their objectives. But by making it a CIC, you also go, well, if in 3 to 5 years' time, your life circumstances change or whatever, there is a structure that exists to support it. There is a bank account. There's a whole load of people who sit around it. And I think that's the way of doing these things, because if you think about something like GDC, I mean, yeah, going back to it, obviously it's organised by a huge whopping events conglomerate now. But if you stretch it back all the way back to its original inception, it started out as the community needs this.
Yeah.
And yes, it's turned into a behemoth. Yes, it's turned into a massive vehicle or whatever. But actually, that's the foundation. There was a great podcast that Google Firestarters one. I cannot remember, unfortunately, the name of the guy who was on it, but it was a recent one about content and saying essentially that if you look at the 3 pillars of what content ends up doing and the value of it, is you have the thing of, obviously, you're providing information to people, you're providing them with sort of regularity, but one of the big things that they say about really great content platforms is they also act as conveners and they bring people together. And I think that was the power that your brand had, It just needed a balance on the logistical side to make sure that when you set this whole thing up, if, God forbid, you get hit by a bus, it doesn't suddenly just take everything out. It's about saying that there's more to it than just you.
And yeah, I think that's a really important aspect of it, because it wasn't just, and I think this is an important thing as well, is that it wasn't just like, hey, this is my show or what have you. I recognize that that's an incredibly arrogant and conceited way to go about this. No, if we're trying to build a community, something that's going to service the community, we should make it community driven and community led rather than it just being mine. And also then at that same point, it's that, because on one hand, yes, make him the face of it, but don't give me control of it, because then I can start dictating all sorts. And I thought, no, that's not the way to go about this, because, first of all, this emerged organically as a group of like-minded individuals who all wanted to achieve a particular goal. But at the same time, I really value and trust their opinion on a lot of stuff quite implicitly in many regards. I've known Dugu and Alan for several years, and I know them both quite well. So to hear their opinions, it's always something I really value. And so I think that was the interesting part was, yes, we see the value in using my brand to advertise it. And critically, as we talked about in my newsletter just this week, that I sold the rights to the CIC for £1 and I paid for that out of my own pocket. So they've got the rights to the AI in Games brand within acceptable limits. We do actually have a legal agreement there as well, where they have to ratify things with me if they want to use the brand in particular ways, but also subsequently I cannot be vindictive and difficult to work with there. Otherwise, I'm violating the agreement on my end, and also that they get. So in the event, say down the line, like you said, 5 years from now, I decide to walk away and we rebrand it something else, I am also legally responsible for helping that transition. And also that the existing conferences, if we say we manage to run this a couple of times and then we rename it, the old ones have to keep the old name and I'm not allowed to go away and mess with that. So in one part, it was yes, let's brand it with me, but also let's protect the organization that we're founding from me in the worst case scenario, assuming that I could do something really horrible, which, and I think this was something, I think this helped settle that conversation and to settle that direction, because I was happy to give those concessions and go, look, I'm totally okay with putting down these rules that I have to play along with, because if we're going to do this in as a community interest company, as a group, as a collaboration, there has to be an aspect of trust to it. And so this was my way of giving trust. And I think the other thing, which everyone will have noticed if you've had a look at the website, you've had a look at all the socials that we've done for it, the branding is different. And that was actually a really good point that was brought up across the board, was if we were to announce AI in Games conference. In fact, at one point I nicknamed it AI in Games Con, and then we've moved away from using that term because there's a risk that sounds like a fan event. It sounds like TwitchCon, right? And so it's all right, well, it's now just a bunch of Tommy's friends hanging out, or Tommy's viewers hanging out somewhere and talking about the YouTube. And I'm like, well, that's not really where we're going either. And so we actually brought Andy Carolyn, shout out to Andy, who did all, if you're looking at things like everything actually right now in terms of all the branding you now see on the Substack, the YouTube channels, the podcast, everything, Andy came in and was really instrumental in putting all that together. So at that point, it was like, right, I want you to come in and rebrand the whole thing as if it was like a business event. And we started leaning to a different color palette, to a different style. So you can tell when you look at it, oh, this is AI in Games, but also, oh, this is new. This is different. And critically, when I announced it on YouTube, I deliberately did an animation where you watch the old logo turn into the conference one to kind of really reinforce that this is something else. We're going in a different direction, but it is still retaining the name,
Yeah, and I think a lot of what you're talking about is actually it's something the games industry can be less than great at, especially when you talk about community endeavors, which is, I mean, first of all, assuming the worst. Actually, a lot of the time you need to plan for the worst. I think the next thing is just around general points around governance. It's not a sexy topic, but it's incredibly important, especially when you're talking about any initiative that pertains to be from the community. And I heard behind the scenes all kinds of horror stories, frankly, about events or community groups that are meant to be serving a particular purpose, who actually, when you look behind the scenes, like there's no structure. It's just sort of naked power grabs, depending upon who's there. So you definitely don't want that. And then I think just in terms of how you've managed to really sort of strike the balance, I think one of the key reasons why it ultimately worked, and this was the reason why in the end I was like, yeah, actually I think you can go for the AI and Games conference. It goes back to something that Dean Barrett, who's the head of Bastion, one of the PR agencies, said to me when I was first working at Yuki and we were working together. He said the best place to be in PR is telling the truth. And the truth for you is that actually AI in Games, it's a YouTube channel, but it is mechanically much, much more than that. It is a trusted resource and repository that ranges across all kinds of content types, that is not just simply, hey, word up, it's your boy Tommy, let's go and watch me drop into squads now for, this round. Which,
it'd be so much easier if that's what it was. I'm not going to lie.
It'd be so much easier. But as a result, you have organically built a community around it, and anyone who's been in your Discord knows that it's a very well run, very well supported, positive community that understands basically exactly what you're doing and what everyone there wants to do and achieve. It's completely coherent. So the logic of hosting an event, it's a bit like, you came to, I did a video games industry memo, like business breakfasty event, and
yes.
My community is nowhere near as developed and honed as yours is, mostly because I'm very much clearly not as developed and honed as you are in terms of what my skill set is. I tend to be a bit of a Swiss Army knife. But the thing is that I think there's a general sense that some of the things that people really know me for is actually what's going on in the media landscape, what's going on in the press, PR world. And so we had a panel of journalists, and as a result of that, people came along really naturally and really easily. It was very, very easy to get everyone along.
I really enjoyed that as well. That was a really good panel. Also, as somebody who is, I guess, I'm sort of involved in games media, and also games press, who's somebody who never has identified as a journalist. But I recognise nowadays that I am somebody described me once as an investigative journalist because I explain how games work, and I'm like, that's not a description I would have ever gave myself. But I really enjoy being in that space just because it's like, this is a different group of people from whom I'm usually around, but equally, this is a group of people, some of whom recognise me as, that guy who does a lot of things akin to what we do, but in a different way. Actually, it was also just really nice. I got a chat to, because you had Chris Pratt from People Make Games on the panel. I've never actually met Chris, and so I went over and quickly introduced myself. We had a really good chat actually for a couple of minutes. So I need to drop him a line. Actually, we said we should keep in touch.
Absolutely. But this, again, is all about the wonderful AI and Games conference. And I think with the point there, just to tie it back, was to say, for me, that event came together very easily because it built upon the community that the content had built. And this conference very naturally extends out of the content and community that you've built. But I think by making it a vehicle for other people in the long term, as in, having that space where you can have other board directors on the CIC, you can turn the advisory board into a full-blown governance council, whatever you want to do. You can put it in that direction just to make sure that it really serves everyone in the long-term interest. And that's, I think, as well, part of the reason why you've been able to strike the balance and get so many great sponsors and supporters and speakers straight through the door, because you've got the winning mix of credibility, knowledge, and ultimately the right structure for people to feel invested in it.
I think you're right there in the sense that, so when we went ahead with, we're going to found the CIC, like one of the difficulties around that is actually who can run it, because for a lot of, actually, so Alan and I are actually the two directors of the CIC, and then we have Gabriel, Matthias and Dugu, who are on our board. Now, the way that this works, and as you said, we will be able to expand this over time. Like, one of the big challenges we actually had is that for the rest of the team, because they all work for AAA game studios, typically if they're going to be involved in external projects, they actually have to get signed off and approved. This is a very common practice in video games. It's also a common practice for a lot of businesses. Like, prehistorically in universities I've worked at, if I was working with an external company, I would have had to have had it vetted by the institution. And there's all sorts of reasons for this that I won't really get into. So I was like, look, I will run the CIC as a director. I don't mind doing that. I'm the director of my own company. I know how to do this to some extent. It's mostly filling in paperwork and maintaining audit trails in case someone goes, oi, have you got a piece of paper that says that this thing happened? At which point you go, yes, including, you'll know yourself, like, did I get paid? Did I pay myself money? Yes, here's the paper trail that I had a meeting with myself to approve that I was going to pay me money. All these silly things. So I'm happy to do that, but I actually did ask if Alan could come on board as the co-director, just so that there was at least, because one of the big things was, if we were going to have a relationship between my company, particularly with the branding aspect of it, it would be disingenuous if my company sends a piece of paperwork and then is signed by the CIC and I'm signatures on both sides. Like, that just looks dodgy. So we need to make sure that there's somebody else to be able to be the voice of reason. But critically, then the rest of the team all got approved to be on the board, so they're on the board. But we have to do we have to make sure we are acting in the interests of the board. If the board turns around and says, we do not agree with this particular line of direction that we are taking, it is Alan and our job, to make sure that we are moving in the direction as what the board has instructed us. So as much as we technically control the CIC, we are equally not dictators, and we cannot tell everybody else how it's going to work. We actually have to do what they tell us. And so again, it's that notion of, relinquishing any sort of aspect of control, but rather it's a mantle of responsibility of, we'll deal with all the boring admin stuff. And then you can help us in maintaining the direction we want to go. And I know that certainly, so you and I, when we were at Develop, we were actually out, we were both peddling our respective businesses, but we were also out there having meetings with companies to get them interested in sponsoring the conference. In fact, one of the meetings we had there was with Amazon. And that was a situation in which, funnily enough, we discovered, I don't know what your perspective was on this, or you foresaw this, but I noticed that as soon as we started being much clearer about the governance of it, that yes, it's branded as an AI and games event, but I don't own it, and it is a collaborative community thing. I think that opened doors, or at least enabled for conversations to move on further than I think they would have otherwise.
Yeah, I think there was, I know one company as well who did raise it, who were like, we need to understand the difference between these two, because ultimately in the end it can come down to things like who holds the budget. If in the end you're more of an influencer than you are someone else, actually it might come out of a different budget. There might be different protocols, there might be different things around it. But I think actually as soon as you move it into being like a not-for-profit community initiative, I mean, it carries the name. I mean, it is a sort of an element of a Trojan horse exercise of basically smuggling the community interest company, which, if it was founded by itself and unbranded, even if you had your name and attachment to it, a lot of people would be going, well, this has never produced anything. We have no sense that this organisation has a track record to deliver this, so why would we back it? So it was about that balancing act of going, yeah, we've got the track record of knowledge, expertise, and all of those things, but we have the security as well. So when you put the cash in, yeah, it's going towards something. And I think as well, it frankly just opens up doors for lots of different things in the future. Initially, obviously, your ambition is around running the event and running the conference and doing that in perpetuity, which makes a lot of sense. But actually, if the conference goes well, this is a big argument for why people should pay for tickets to come and attend, why people should sponsor, is that it creates then the potential for a longer term pot, which exists, which can serve community functions, which could help to support widen access to the event in future years in terms of, increasing the number of subsidised passes that we can hand out. Or it can go into other kind of directions as well in the future in terms of wider community support, wider community initiatives. Yes. Who knows? Even into other things like other events, CV checks, training classes for people who are starting out. It creates that momentum of its own. But the only way you can do it is actually by working out how to lean on your name and do so in a way that makes the most of what you've built without making it all about you.
Yeah, and I think that was certainly the big thing. I think that and this is a bit of a very interesting period of reflection for myself personally, because like you say, like the brand is evolving right now, and it's weird to say that out loud when the brand is also inherently me. And it was funny being part of these meetings with the CIC team where, it was so funny because I think on a more than one occasion someone would say, I mean this with full respect to Tommy, and I'm not saying this about you right now, but, and then we would mention a hypothetical of like, imagine like evil Tommy goes and does all these things. And so it was a very weird scenario to be in where like, these are very important conversations we need to have, but also I am the subject of all of it. And there's a certain necessity to detach yourself a little bit from that and recognize that, yeah, there is who I am personally, but then there is Tommy from AI and Games, and that is actually a separate thing. And so being able to, it's almost church and state a little bit, but I think the other part of it is just seeing this evolution of the brand and where it could go. And this, you said already, like it's built a kind of trust, but it's one of these things that it's kind of been retconning itself as it goes, because I never intended to be here. I never thought that this would be where this would end up. It's wild. Like I mentioned it, I think in a few of the social media posts. This is the 10-year anniversary of the YouTube channel, which has been built on taking talks from conferences and making them more accessible to a broader audience. And now here we are running our very first event, which has been branded with the YouTube channel. Like on one level, that is like the sweetest thing. Like, I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. On the other hand, I'm also like, oh shit, we need to nail this. Like we need to do a really good job of it. We need to hit the ground running. And I mean, and critically, like you said, we were kind of talking about the sponsorship thing. We had no budget. We had no speakers. We had no venue 2 months ago, 3 months ago. And so this has happened very quickly, which, correct me if I'm wrong, this is a fairly quick turnaround, right? Like usually conferences take a little bit longer to come together.
Well, that's a very good point. Notionally, conferences take a bit longer to come together. I've seen conferences bosh together in about 2 months, and that's not fun for anyone involved. But normally, what I will say, normally conferences that are turned around very quickly are done so by professional event organisations who have decks to roll out where you swap some logos in, reprogram some numbers, and you create a bit of a by numbers 6 out of 10 event that happens. People are fine with it, and ultimately what they do is they treat the activity of running a conference as just part of a wider exchange of money between training budgets on businesses or marketing budgets or whatever. And that's fine. That exists. People make a living doing that, and good luck to them. But I think the whole thing for you is also going, and this is the other reason, actually, in a sense, why the AI and Games brand being involved is very good, is because it invests you into making sure this is bloody brilliant, right? And it keeps everyone who's involved in the community on track, because, trust is hard won, easily lost. So making sure it's really good is really key. And that's the reason why we're doing all kinds of work to do it, including lots of great speakers, lots of great sponsors, and even putting on some nice coffee breaks. That's always good. Make sure you got some good hot drinks.
I'll need coffee probably. Like myself and the rest, and you and the rest of the organizational team. We're going to be running at 100 mile an hour on the day. But yeah, I think it's funny because depending on where you are in the industry, this was actually the world's worst kept secret for the last 2 months, because we told so many people that we were trying to do it. So obviously the conversations with the companies around sponsorship, we reached out to several of them a couple of months ago. Like as soon as we were like, we're going to try and make this happen, like we need to have and when George came in, you're like, right, you need a proper sponsorship deck. You need to have a proper, all these bits and pieces. And then you and I went away and built the sponsor deck. And then we had the CIC vet it. And then we started sending it out and, reaching out to our own network of people who know us, know the brand. And as you say, like we had to have that conversation about CIC and like the building that legitimacy of it. But also at the same time, there was a lot of people who immediately could see what we were trying to go for. And we're like, well, let's have a chat. This sounds good. And I think one thing to stress as well is that we're so late in the year in doing this that it actually makes it difficult sometimes to get that sponsorship because budgets get realigned at different parts of the year. So we're actually quite late in the calendar year to be reaching out to people for money, because a lot of those companies are like, well, this sounds amazing, but we have no budget anymore for sponsoring events because we've already put all the money into sponsoring these other 8 events that are running between now and the end of the year. So that was a big exercise there. But then also subsequently myself, Dugu, like all the rest of the team, we all reached out internally to our own networks going, yo, are you free to give a talk? Are you free to give a talk? And so we've got, I think there's 8 or 9 talks on the website now. We have about another 8 or 9 to announce that we know are going to be we're finalizing them with the speakers right now. And so I think there's like certain pockets of like Ubisoft, for example, all knew this was happening 2 months ago because they were all invited to come and give a talk at it at some point, because that's where Gabriel works. And so he was reaching out across all these different teams in Ubisoft going, yo, we're running a thing. Would you like to come and give a talk? And so I actually met somebody at Develop who's like, is it true you guys are trying to put an event on? I'm like, yeah, just between us, like, it's not a thing yet. That's literally why I'm here. We're running around trying to see if we can get companies interested in putting some collateral behind it and helping us get this off the ground. So, I mean, a huge thank you to the whole of the CIC team for putting this together. Also, I mean, a big shout out to Alan. Alan couldn't make it onto the podcast today, but Alan has organized and managed most of the event stuff entirely on his own. And then you and I went down to meet with him in London last week and saw the venue, which was great. But that's something I haven't had to deal with at all. I'm mostly filling out contracts and signing procurement forms and all these other boring admin things that no one else wants to do, but that's my job. And then subsequently just the rest of the CIC team for finding the speakers. We had so many people come back and say, oh man, this sounds great. I'd love to do this. And of course to yourself, because you've been able to kind of get us organized in a way that we needed to be. And sure, I think we've still got a long road ahead of us, but at the same time, I feel like getting to yesterday was going to be the hardest part. From like in my head, I'm like, until this is out in the world, and I think this is the way my brain works as well. As soon as we turn around and go, yo, this is a thing and it's happening and this is when it's happening, suddenly I'm like, all right, it's go time. But until that point, I think you and I I think you called me or you messaged me like on Tuesday, like, how you doing? Are you all right? And I'm like,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's plenty of work to do, but
oh yes.
The honest truth is that most first conference events lose money. That's the reality on these kinds of things, and I think basically everything indicates that we're already past that, which is remarkable, and you just don't see it. And that's, I think, testament to the quality of the event, the quality of the program that's been put together. I think it's just going to be a great conference. We've got to make sure everything lands. We do everything right. I've got to go out and talk to a load more businesses and get a few more sponsors on the door. I've got a busy week probably at Gamescom, just knocking on, not actual
doors.
We
appreciate you for that. I'm not at Gamescom, so I appreciate you going out.
You're doing the sensible thing. But I think the main thing is just to encourage everyone who's listening to come along if you fancy it. Because it's a hell of a thing.
Yes, I mean, of course, it's aiandgamesconference.com. Head on over there and you can find out everything you need to know about organisers, the speakers, the talks we've announced, tickets, the venue. We are going to have a few more announcements in the next coming weeks with regards to, we actually have a discount for accommodation nearby. We also have a stack of new speakers. I literally just had 2 new talks approved internally in the last couple of days that I'm very excited to bring in. And yeah, it's coming together. It's coming together. It's a crazy thing. It's a crazy thing. But I think certainly like you said, I think it's going to be good. I'm already excited at the vibe because I was just looking at our ticket sales. Ticket sales are going good. Yeah. But also because we see the back end, it's like, who's buying the tickets? And it's like, oh, I recognize like half the people that have signed up already. That's amazing. Even if I don't know them personally, it's like I recognize the name or I recognize the institution and go, oh, that is so cool that they're coming to be with us. at the event. And certainly I'm having conversations across the industry with people saying we're trying to get this approved, because of course, like, a lot of people are trying to send a team to go, but they have to get that approved by a manager or something else, and they're like, what's the ticket sales like? Are we going to be all right? Are we going to be able to get in? And I was like, the fact that people are enthusiastic and worried that they're not going to get a ticket, I was like, right, this makes me feel good. Not because I'm trying to fleece them for ticket money, but more that people want to be there. And so that's giving me a really good idea as to the vibe and the energy that we're going to have there. So yeah, now that it's announced, I'm super excited to talk about it more. Whereas 2 weeks ago, if somebody asked me, I'm like, don't bring it up.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, and all I will say is, unlike you, I will just say tickets are selling fast. If you want to come along, you've got to make sure you buy, because you snooze, you lose. That's what I'm going to say. But this is the reason why you've got me doing the commercial side, right? This is exactly the kind of messaging you need.
You can sell. I think that's actually a big thing, is that I'm not very good at selling. So like it's just not in my DNA. My brain isn't wired to know how to do that sort of thing. Despite the fact that I help write a lot of marketing copy for companies who are building AI tech. Yep. Fun fact. But just doing the pitch is often the thing I struggle with. But that's why that's literally why I said I need to go and talk to George Osborne, because you know what you're doing in that regard. So I really appreciate you being here today on the podcast, and I appreciate you coming on board for this nonsense, because I think you've helped us get it over the line to this point massively. And I think critically, like, so we've got you on today. We will hopefully have another episode of the podcast in the weeks to come, where I want to get the entire team on to talk a little bit more about the whole process, particularly around editorial and the type of things that we were, and the overall vision of the CIC, because I think that's a really important thing to kind of get out there. Like, we talked a little bit about it earlier, but I'd really like to get Alan, Gugu, Matthias and Gabrielle onto the call as well, just to kind of talk a little bit about that in more detail, and critically also get their perspectives on this as well, because I know we're all aligned, but I think they all come to it from very different directions.
Absolutely. And I think as well, the other thing that will be very interesting, I know people are starting to see some of the speakers already. I think what will be great with the advisory board is having that moment to really talk about what the themes of the agenda are looking like, what those tracks are really looking like, and how those talks are coming together too. Because I think, as you say, as these talks get approved, you're seeing some really, really interesting stuff in there. And I think it'll be a lot of fun to start talking about that in a bit more detail.
On that note, if you are listening to this and going, oh man, this sounds good, not only do I want to be there, but I actually want to pitch a talk, we do have an open call for submissions that closes on September 6th, which is a Friday. If you go over to the website right now, aiandgamesconference.com, there is a link there for a pitch to submit your pitch to the event. And we give a full breakdown of instructions of what we are looking for, how to pitch it, and the way to go about it. And critically, we also give you a bit of a breakdown in the process that everybody on the CIC team will review it. We actually are stealing a lot of good ideas from how we do things at the AI Summit at GDC. We will be properly reviewing and vetting every single talk that is submitted to us, and the talks that we accept. You will receive a complimentary ticket to the event, but more importantly, we also assign a mentor from the CIC to each speaker to help them get the talk out the door. And this is something we actually talked about this in the GDC episode, about the value that brought to the AI Summit this year, just because we had so many first-time speakers who were coming up through the industry during the pandemic and had never had a chance to give a talk before. And so we thought, no, we're definitely doing the same thing here, because one, it helps ensure that we put on a good event, but two, we don't want to just say, hey, congratulations, you've been invited, we'll see you in November. Ooh, off you go and write as a talk. Like, it's got to be a dialogue. It's got to be a conversation. I think that's always how you get the best out of these presentations, because we help them understand areas that we'd like to see more of, and critically, they can also ask us questions that, better to ask us 2 months in advance than like 2 minutes. Yeah,
absolutely.
All right, we'll wrap this up then, because I know you're a busy man and you have stuff to do. Have you got a book to write? Above all
I do have a book to write. Yeah, I don't think I've actually been on since the book was announced. But Power Play: The Inside Story of How Video Games Influence the World is out in 2026. Just got to write that by 2025, so that'll be fine.
Okay,
cool. I've got time. Yeah, I think it's one of those things where at the moment, and this will be my final thought on this podcast, it's currently in the danger zone in which I have definitely enough time to do it, but not quite enough time to have panicked about it yet. And so...
Oh, I know that one.
You need... What you need, I think, and I'm assuming, especially with Doctor, PhD, I think it's like it's almost like I need to have 3 months less. Like at that point, 3 fewer months, and then suddenly...
The one bit of advice I'd give you, I don't know if I gave you this advice, but the advice that I would give you is, from writing my own thesis, is I allocate X amount of time or days a week to writing the book. But what I used to do was I used to set myself a word limit. Yeah. So it was like, I had to write, I think it was like 4 days in a week, I had to write a minimum of 500 words, guaranteeing 2,000 words a week were written in my thesis. But if it was a struggle to get to word 500 on that day, you immediately, as soon as you hit 500 words, you stop, you drop, and then you go and do something else. However, if there are days where you hit 500 words and you just keep going and you're feeling the flow, you keep going until you run out of juice.
Yeah.
And I found that was a bit of advice given to me, and I found that a really useful exercise, because on the days where you need to where you're struggling to write, you just get something on the page, and then the other days where it's just clicking for you, then you just keep going. And critically, if you're struggling to get that 500 words on the page, it could be 500 of the worst words ever put together, but there's 500 words there. And once you see them, the next time you go and redraft it, you're like, oh, what in the hell was I thinking when I wrote that? And subsequently, draft 2 becomes faster. So there you go. That's my take. I wrote my I can't even remember how many thousand words are in my thesis. My PhD thesis is 250 pages long, and I wrote it in 5 months. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, to leave you on the words of a friend of mine who's a successful writer, written a couple of books, but I know that he gave me this advice over a WhatsApp message, so I'm not going to say specifically who it is. Writing is found in the 4th draft. That's
very good.
Very good.
Well, let's end it at that then. The Branching Factor podcast is hosted and produced by me, Tommy Thompson. Our theme music is provided courtesy of Ben Ridge. The logo and thumbnail art is thanks to Helen Odell. And of course, to all of you out there listening, thanks for joining us for this episode of Branching Factor. Wherever you are in the world, be sure to stay safe, have fun, and we will be back.